I'd never been one for superstitions. In fact, I always prided myself on being a level-headed, rational person. But that all changed one afternoon when I found myself at a yard sale in a quiet part of town. The kind of neighborhood where the houses were set back behind tall trees and everything looked perfectly ordinary, until you looked a little closer. The house where the sale was being held was small, unassuming, with peeling paint on the shutters and a weathered front porch. The yard was scattered with items, old books, faded knickknacks, chipped porcelain dolls. But then something caught my eye, hidden in the far corner of the yard, covered with a thin, tattered sheet. At first, I thought it was just another broken piece of furniture, maybe an old couch or something equally unremarkable. But when I walked closer and pulled the sheet away, I froze. It was a rocking chair. But not just any rocking chair. This one was beautifully carved, the wood dark and smooth, with intricate designs that seemed almost too detailed for something so old. It looked like it belonged in a museum. I ran my fingers over the polished surface and immediately felt a chill run up my spine. Something about the chair felt wrong, as though it were waiting for something or someone. The elderly woman hosting the sale smiled at me from across the yard. She looked harmless enough, but her smile seemed to stretch a little too wide, her eyes a little too eager. She noticed my interest in the rocking chair and slowly walked over. "It's a family heirloom," she said softly. "It's been passed down for generations." I nodded, trying to mask the unease creeping over me. "How much is it?" "Oh, it's not for sale," she replied, her voice lowering. "But if you're really interested, I suppose we could make an exception." I should have walked away. I should have ignored the strange pull I felt toward it. But something kept me rooted to the spot. I bought the chair. The first night I brought it home, I thought I could hear it creaking from across the room. I dismissed it as my imagination. After all, old furniture creaks. But then the creaking grew louder, more distinct. It wasn't just the chair rocking back and forth. It was as though someone was sitting in it, shifting their weight, waiting. I told myself I was being ridiculous, but the sound didn't stop. Every night it got worse. I couldn't ignore it anymore. I started staying awake, watching the chair. But no matter how still I sat, I couldn't see anything. The rocking would continue, slowly at first, then faster, as if it were being rocked by invisible hands. One night, as I sat in the dim light of my living room, staring at the chair, it happened. The air around me grew cold. I watched in shock as the chair began to rock more violently. The back of it creaked with a low groan, as if some unseen force was pushing it back and forth, faster, harder. I stood up, heart pounding in my chest. But before I could move, a soft voice, barely audible, whispered from behind me. "You shouldn't have brought it home." I spun around, but there was no one there. The house was silent. I turned back to the chair. The rocking had stopped, but something else was wrong. There, in the seat, was a faint impression, as though someone had been sitting there. The imprint of a body. And on the floor near the chair was a trail of muddy footprints, leading toward the hallway. I had to know what was happening. I couldn't leave it like this, couldn't just pretend it was all in my head. So I did something I had never thought I'd do. I contacted the previous owner, the elderly woman who'd sold it to me. When I arrived at her house, it felt colder than before. She welcomed me inside with that same unsettling smile, but I could see the worry in her eyes. She knew why I was here. "I told you not to take it," she said, almost pleading. "You've seen it, haven't you? The thing in the chair?" I nodded, my voice trembling. "What is it? What's happening?" She sighed deeply. "The chair was cursed. It's been in my family for generations. My great-grandfather brought it home after a long journey. He didn't know that it had already been claimed by something evil. That thing, the one that sits in it, is not human. It's been feeding off the souls of whoever dared to sit in it." She paused, her eyes widening in fear. "Once it claims you, it never lets you go." I rushed back home, terrified by the woman's words. But the chair. It was still there, sitting silently in the corner of the room. The room felt colder now, the air thick with an unseen presence. That night, I made the mistake of sitting in the chair. I told myself I was just being foolish, that I had to face whatever it was, end it once and for all. But as I sat, something strange began to happen. The air around me grew colder, and the shadows in the corners of the room seemed to shift. My heart started to race, but I couldn't move. My body felt heavy, as though something was pressing down on me. I tried to stand, but I couldn't. The chair held me down, its arms like iron chains trapping me in place. And then a voice, deep and gravelly, whispered in my ear. "You're mine now." I could feel it, the presence, the thing that had claimed the chair, now claiming me. It wasn't just in my head. I could see it, a figure in the shadows, its eyes glowing red with malice. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. And when I finally managed to stand, the chair was empty. But the feeling remained. I was never alone. Now, every time I look at the chair, I can feel it calling to me. It's waiting for the next person to sit down. And I wonder, who will be the next one? I've always enjoyed going to yard sales. There's something about finding old treasures and hearing the stories behind them that I just love. But there was one yard sale that changed everything. It was a bright Saturday morning when I saw the sign. Yard sale, everything must go, it read in bold letters. It was in a quiet neighborhood, the kind where the houses were spaced out and surrounded by trees. The house where the sale was held looked old, but in a charming way, like it had been standing there for many years. I wandered through the yard looking at the items. There were a few pieces of furniture, a box of old books, and even some strange trinkets. But then in the corner of the yard, I noticed an old wooden box. It was small with intricate carvings on it. I felt drawn to it like it was calling to me. I knelt down and picked it up. The woman running the sale, an elderly lady with gray hair, noticed me and walked over. "Oh, you found the box," she said. "It's special, that one. Been in the family for years." I could tell by the way she said it that there was something more to it. "How much for the box?" I asked, even though I wasn't sure why I wanted it. "It's not for sale," she replied, her voice quiet. "But if you really want it, I suppose I could let it go. Just remember, it's a piece of our family history." I didn't know why, but something about her words made me hesitate. Still, I couldn't resist. I bought the box and took it home. That night, I placed the box on my dresser. I didn't think much of it at first, but then things started happening. At first, it was small things, objects in my house being moved slightly, like they had been touched when no one was around. I brushed it off as nothing. But soon it got worse. I started hearing noises at night, soft whispers just beyond my hearing. I'd wake up to find the box had moved on its own, just a few inches from where I had left it. Every time I touched it, I felt a chill run through my fingers, but I told myself it was just the cold weather. One night, I decided to open the box. Inside, there was nothing but old, faded paper and a few broken pieces of jewelry. But the moment I touched them, a strange feeling came over me, like a weight pressing on my chest. I quickly shut the box, but the strange feeling didn't go away. For the first time, I felt afraid of the box. I decided to get rid of it. The next day, I took the box back to the yard sale. The elderly lady was still there, sitting in the same spot. When she saw me, her face went pale. "You brought it back," she whispered, looking worried. "I can't keep it," I said, almost pleading. It's been causing strange things to happen." She didn't speak right away. Finally, she nodded and said softly, "I should have told you sooner. That box isn't just a family heirloom. It's something more. Dangerous. It holds the spirit of my great-grandfather. He wasn't a good man and he never found peace. The box keeps his anger locked inside." I stared at her, feeling cold. "What do you mean? What's going to happen?" The woman looked at me, her eyes wide with fear. "I'm afraid it's already begun. The spirit won't let you go unless it's free. You have to find a way to get rid of it, or it will come for you." I didn't know what to do. I left the yard sale, box in hand, unsure of where to go or what to believe. That night, I locked the box in my closet, hoping that would be enough. But when I woke up, I felt something was wrong. The room was colder than usual. I got out of bed, my heart pounding, and went to the closet. The box was gone. I searched my entire house, calling out for the box, but it was nowhere to be found. Then I heard the whispers again, this time louder, clearer. "You shouldn't have taken me," a voice hissed from the shadows. I turned around, and standing in the corner of the room was a figure. It was a man, his face twisted in anger, his eyes black as night. The man's mouth opened, and I heard his voice again, this time in my head. "You should have left it alone. Now you belong to me." Suddenly, everything went black. I don't know how long I was out, but when I came to, the figure was gone and so was the box. But I could still hear the whispers, and sometimes, just sometimes, when I look into the dark, I can see those eyes staring back at me. And I know deep down that it's not over yet. The box is still out there, waiting. It was a quiet Saturday morning when I decided to visit a yard sale just a few streets over. I had heard about it from a neighbor who said there were some interesting old things being sold. I wasn't really looking for anything, but I loved the idea of finding a hidden treasure. When I arrived, the yard was full of things, old furniture, books, clothes, and all sorts of random knickknacks. But there was one item that caught my eye, sitting all alone in the back corner of the yard. It was an old wooden box, the kind you might see in an antique shop. It was small, but something about it made me feel curious. The wood was weathered with faded carvings on the top. It seemed special even though it was covered in dust. The woman running the sale saw me looking at it. She smiled at me, but there was something in her eyes that made me feel uneasy. "That box belonged to my grandmother," she said, her voice low. "It's been in the family for years. I'm just selling it because it's too much for me to keep." I wasn't sure what she meant, but I liked the look of the box. I asked her how much it was, and she told me it was only a couple of dollars. Without thinking, I handed her the money and took the box home. That evening after dinner, I sat down on the couch and stared at the box. It was small, but it had an old feel to it, like it had seen things I couldn't understand. I was curious about what might be inside, but the latch was rusty and I didn't want to break it. Instead, I left it on the table and went to bed, but when I woke up, something was different. The box was open. I couldn't remember opening it. My heart began to race as I looked inside. There was nothing but a small piece of paper and a strange key. The paper had just a few words written on it, barely legible. "Don't open it. Not yet." My hands shook as I stared at the key. It was old, just like the box. It seemed to hold some kind of power, but I didn't know what it was for. I thought about throwing it away, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. Something about it kept pulling me in. That night, I heard strange noises. At first, I thought it was the house settling, but it was different. It was a soft scraping sound, like something was moving in the walls. I tried to ignore it, but the sound kept getting louder and closer. It sounded like nails on wood, dragging slowly across the floor. I woke up in the middle of the night, my heart pounding in my chest. The scraping sound had stopped, but now there was something else. I could feel a cold breeze coming from the direction of the box. It was like the air in the room had changed, colder, heavier. I slowly got up, feeling a chill run down my spine. As I walked to the table, I saw the box again. The key was gone. My heart skipped a beat. I didn't remember touching it, but it was gone. I turned around, searching the room, but there was no sign of it. Suddenly, I heard the scraping sound again. This time, it was coming from the closet. I opened the door, my breath shallow, and looked inside. There, at the back of the closet, I saw something I didn't expect. The box was there, sitting open with the key inside it. But it wasn't just the box that caught my eye. There was something else, something moving inside. I couldn't see it clearly, but it looked like a shadow? A hand? I closed the door quickly, my heart racing. I didn't know what to do. I was scared, but I felt like I couldn't leave. I had to figure out what was happening. The next morning, I decided to leave the house. I couldn't stay in that place anymore. As I walked out the door, I felt like something was watching me. I looked back at the house, and for a brief second, I thought I saw a face in the window. When I turned around, I realized I was holding the key. I didn't remember picking it up, but there it was in my hand. The strange thing was, it looked like it was getting colder, more faded, like it was losing its color. And when I looked back at the window, the face was gone. I left, but I couldn't forget about the box. And as I walked away from the house, I realized something terrifying. The closer I got to the yard sale, the more the box seemed to call me back. I didn't want to go back, but it felt like the box had taken hold of me. I tried to ignore it, but I couldn't. And every night since then, I hear that scraping sound. Only now, I know it's not in the walls. It's following me. I wasn't one to shy away from a good bargain. In fact, I loved yard sales. There was something about them, the mix of old, forgotten treasures and the thrill of uncovering something special. One chilly morning, I wandered into a neighborhood that felt like it had been frozen in time. You know the type. Where everything seemed slightly off, as though it had been stuck in a moment from years ago. The house that hosted this particular sale was old, almost ancient looking. The kind of place that makes you wonder what secrets it held within its walls. It looked like a place where memories had been left to rot. But there, scattered across the yard, were all sorts of things: glassware, a faded quilt, an assortment of dusty furniture. Nothing that immediately caught my eye until I saw it. In the corner of the yard, half hidden behind an old rocking chair, was a mirror. But not just any mirror. This one was framed with elaborate carvings. It was ornate, almost like something you'd expect to find in a mansion, not in someone's yard sale. There was something about the way the glass shimmered, even under the dull gray sky, that made it difficult to look away. It drew me in. When I picked it up, I felt an odd sensation, a coldness in the air around me, though the day was far from chilly. The mirror's surface didn't reflect the yard as it should have. My face looked wrong. It was as though the reflection had a life of its own. A slight delay, like it was processing me rather than simply reflecting me. I thought it was my imagination. Maybe I was just tired. But as I stared harder, I realized something more disturbing. The delay wasn't the only strange thing. The reflection in the mirror didn't quite match the world I was standing in. It wasn't the yard behind me that I saw in the glass, but something darker. Something I couldn't place. My heart started to race. I turned the mirror to walk away, thinking I'd just imagined it. But then, something moved. Not me. Not the yard behind me. But a shadow, deep and inky, curling at the corner of the frame. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, but it wasn't. It was moving. Alive. My breath hitched. I couldn't look away, though every instinct told me to run. I took a step back, and that's when it happened. The reflection behind me in the glass began to shift. The garden? It wasn't there anymore. Instead, the reflection was showing a room, dark, ominous. I couldn't make out the details, but there was someone standing in the far corner, just watching. My mind screamed, I need to leave. But as I glanced down, the figure in the reflection stepped forward. Its movement was slow, deliberate, as if it was closing in on me. I froze in place, unable to move, my heart pounding in my chest. My hands trembled as I dropped the mirror. The sound of it crashing to the ground echoed around me. But that wasn't the worst part. No, the worst part came next. A voice. Faint, so soft I almost didn't hear it. A whisper right behind me. You shouldn't have taken it. I turned to run. My legs were like jelly. But as I glanced back, the mirror was gone. Completely gone. I couldn't understand. It was there 1 second, and in the next, it had disappeared, leaving nothing behind but the faintest echo of that voice. But that feeling, that heavy feeling of being watched, followed me. I felt like something was still there, waiting for me to make a mistake, to slip up. I couldn't shake it. I could still hear the whisper in my mind, haunting me. That night, after I'd convinced myself it was over, that I had outrun whatever was stalking me, I went to bed, the weight of the day finally pulling me under. But I woke up in the middle of the night. Something wasn't right. It was the feeling again, that heavy sensation, that presence I couldn't escape. I sat up in bed, heart racing. And there, outside the window, the same reflection. It was back. That shadow, that figure standing there in the darkness, staring at me. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was the whisper. It was no longer outside my head. It was inside. A voice growing clearer, closer. You took it. You can never leave. I haven't been able to escape it. Every mirror I pass, every glass window, I can feel them watching me. And now, every time I look into a mirror, I can't help but wonder, is it me looking back? Or is it them? And if I really look, will they be standing behind me, waiting? If you ever come across an old mirror like that, remember my story. Do not touch it, because some things should never be brought home.